You see yourself so far removed from where you are right now, right? You've healed, that you've moved so far along your pathway that yes, it's still you, but it's a more optimal version of you now. It's
Yeah.
a higher version of you now, right? And that higher version allows unspeakable joy. It allows unspeakable ease. It allows financial prosperity. It allows aligned, beautiful relationships. It allows us the ability to set boundaries that are right sized, to ask for what we're worth, to know that we can take up space in the world, to know that we're worthy of living a great life. It doesn't matter that we've never seen anyone do it in our lives, right? We have so much power, and we will not discover that fully unless we walk the pathway of healing.
What's up, you beautiful beasts? I'm Katie. I'm on a mission to help humans become the best possible versions of themselves and to strive for overall health, mental health, emotional health, physical health, all of the healths, without ever having to step on a scale. I have had the privilege to talk to all kinds of different humans who've been through a plethora of experiences just being a human and existing. I believe that every single time somebody shares their story, at least one person listening will learn from it, be inspired by it, and maybe, just maybe, even change the entire direction of their life. These are the stories of humans unveiling their beautiful beast. Keep listening. This is the Unveiling the Beast podcast. So how are you today?
I'm good. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I was attempting to do some pre-stalking to see what we might be talking about. And for some reason, my phone, well, I guess I could have done it on my computer, but my phone was not working properly. So it's a blind date.
Hey, you know what? I've done plenty of those. It'll be a great conversation.
Yes. So tell me a little bit about who you are and why you think you are who you are.
Yeah, I love that question. So I'm many, many things. I say often, I'm like every woman. I feel like I've done a lot over the course of my life. So currently, I'm an author of my first book called Me Too, A Therapist's Journey to Heal, Find Liberation and Joy. And that question about who I am is very much embedded in the book. Of course, to write a book about your life, there would be multiple volumes, right? But the things that definitely had some of the most significant experience impacts on me, and particularly when we're talking about trauma. And so I know that that traumatic background has to do with why I became a therapist and how I meandered to a holistic health journey, and to starting all kinds of things like CDF Freedom Schools in Kalamazoo and Be Well Beautiful Woman, which is what I'm currently doing. It's a global wellness company that's all about helping women to center their healing and their liberation. And then I just started another 501(c)(3, Be Well Beautiful People, that will be the brother to Be Well Beautiful Woman. So very same mission. One is a not-for-profit and one is a social enterprise. And I'm still centering the experiences that of people that need it the most. And so even the mission to serve people that need it the most are very much connected to my identities. Of course, what research has shared about, the importance of making sure that income isn't a barrier for people to be well, or my lived experience as a multiracial Black woman and growing up in poverty, and all of those things certainly shaped me as much as traveling the world. I've been to 33 countries across 6 continents. And so when you can see the way that people live and you can do it in an immersive way as much as you can as an outsider, then that certainly shapes you, and countless other things across my lifetime that brought me to this space.
I love it. So you're basically a woman on fire.
Well, that's what passion is, right? That's what purpose
Yeah.
is. Passion is the second highest vibrational emotion that exists. And so it's not hokey for us to, ask ourselves, what is our highest use and our highest good? Because it's very much connected to our mission, our joy, our peace, when we can find it. And I'm grateful that I have found it many times over across my lifespan, from starting out as in the nonprofit sector, working as an AmeriCorps employee, to serving on a management team and deciding that I wanted to be a consultant because I saw that's what, you know, people were coming in to help us do. And I thought, oh, I could see myself doing this, right? But not even seeking out to do anything, just being open to the way that my life has unfolded and just said yes, right? When that inkling came about. So all of those things are definitely connected to my
Yeah,
purpose. But I think we have multiple purposes across our lifespan.
definitely. I totally agree with that. So I love that you were saying when you were writing your book, you're like, when you're writing a book about yourself, you could write, what did you say, novels or
Volume.
multiple volumes. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's funny you say that because I've thought about writing a book about my life before, and I'm like, what do I even write about? There's so much in it, you know. I'm almost 40 years old. Like there's just so many stories. So I like that you said that. But I wanted to ask you, what if you're willing to share with the listeners, what is your story of your trauma?
Yeah, it's a big story. So what I'll say is that I have what's called 8 out of 10 adverse childhood experiences. And those are trauma indicate benchmarks or indicators, if you will. And it's rooted in a research study that was done by Kaiser Permanente back in the late 1980s. And there were about 18,000 people that participated in the study to come up with these trauma indicators. And there's an expanded version now that has 5 additional things. So we're talking about things like abuse and neglect, witnessing a parent being abused violently by someone. It's sexual assault, it's rape, um, it's having a parent that's been incarcerated, and a lot of other things like that. And then the expanded
Mm.
version includes things like witnessing community violence, bullying, um, being a person of color, and uh, the racism that's associated with that, and how that affects
Mhm.
one's health, which is classified as trauma. So a lot of those themes are represented in the book, and these are certainly not the only things that happened to me, but they were the most significant things to tell that story about having 8 out of 10 ASAs, and then, being in this multiracial Black body. And I say multiracial because I have 41% European ancestry. And so it's a way for me to really honor the fullness of who I am. And yet, being a Black woman is very central to my identity. So I keep those two things in. And I think it's so important for us to identify for ourselves, like who we are and how we want to be in the world based on facts and based on perceptions, right? And
Mhm.
what we want to illuminate, essentially. So the most significant things that happened in my life are related to my trauma, are in the book. And the aftermath, there was a period in my life where this last traumatic experience happened to me, and it nearly obliterated me.
Mm.
And I describe in my book being a walking zombie at best and fascinated with death at worst. And so that went on for probably a good 4 years or so before I started to see the light and my life started to change. And even after that, because change isn't linear, you can take 2 steps forward and find yourself taking 3 steps back, right? Because it's change doesn't always happen, right? From A to B to C to D. Sometimes it's
Right.
like A to E, and then you're back to B, right?
Right.
Or you might go
Yeah.
from B to Z, right? You have people
Yeah.
that, go cold turkey related to something. But that's just not the way that most of us are wired. It's not typically the way that human behavior works. And then after that, I have 3 chapters dedicated to the practices that were most paramount to my healing. And they're not just good for trauma survivors, they're really good for any of us. So there's a chapter on grief. In fact, I was really looking forward to talking with you in general, but it is my father's birthday today, and
Mm,
I lost him to a freak accident about 10 years ago. And he actually
mhm,
planted the first seed for me to write this book many, 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 many years later from that first day that he had that conversation with me. And so, if we can learn to honor grief, then life is better from that place. Many of us get stuck in the intense emotions that
yeah.
inevitably arise, or, we believe that there's some arrival that is magically going to happen. No, like wounds can be so deep that they will move us to deep emotion across our lifespan in some shape or form. The key is just not to get stuck. So, yeah, a chapter on grief, a chapter on forgiveness, and then a chapter on abundance mindset. I've been a student of abundance for about 8 or 9 years and have read so many books, and I teach people on their power to co-create their lives and to alchemize things like trauma, to alchemize things like poverty. So, and there's a lot of other things, like level setting what trauma is, uh, particularly how it shows up in children and the research, because it's very different, much like someone that has PTSD. So, the book was written for survivors, but also for people, just everyday people that so it's about the normalization of trauma, knowing that
Mhm.
70% of the US population has had at least one traumatic event across their lifespan. That's a huge number of people. And then you've got, folks like me that have more essentially, and they're connected to all kind of negative health outcomes uh,
Mhm.
on a mind, body, spirit level. So um, my quest is to help as many of us that want to heal to get to a place of healing, particularly through these really simple practices that we don't really have to pay anyone. I mean, certainly sometimes we do need to pay someone. I'm a therapist, I'm a certified professional coach, I do speaking and training and all kinds of things. And I believe that healing is accessible to all of us, and the body, because if that weren't the case, then if we, when we went out in nature, it wouldn't ignite the body's ability to heal itself, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we're sitting on such a gold mine, if you will, that is really untapped. So the practices, holistic kinds of things that I've been trained in are also, themes throughout the book. So
Nice. I love that. And I want to touch a little bit more on how all of this can affect your health because I'm in the health space and so many people just believe that health is eating and movement and it's so much more than that. And so I wanted to go back and touch on what you were talking about with trauma being stored in the body.
yeah, yeah. So there isn't one major organ system in the body that trauma doesn't affect. So, one of the things that we found, and everything that I talk about is research based, even though I use a quote often from Albert Einstein that says that, everything that's meaningful we can't measure, and everything that we measure is not meaningful, right? But luckily,
Mhm.
there's a lot of good research on a lot of these holistic modalities. So, if we're talking about ADD and ADHD, for example, one of the things that we found is that many people are misdiagnosed with ADD and ADHD, and it's actually a manifestation of their trauma. So,
Mm,
imagine going to get this diagnosis, and then you get medication to address the diagnoses, but that's not actually the problem. And then you have to deal with all of the symptomology that happens as a result of the side effects, right, of taking this
yeah.
medication. Well, in trauma in general, we are still spending an exorbitant amount of money on medicating and on cognitive behavioral therapy, which, when you're talking about PTSD and complex childhood trauma, these methods do next to nothing to help those kind of survivors heal. It's actually somatic, creative um, practices, mindset practices. That's why there's a chapter on abundance mindset, because whatever we think, we become, right? So it's one thing to say I'm depressed. It's another thing to say I have depression. It doesn't have the same meaning. It doesn't have the same vibration. Now, I'm a licensed therapist. That was where I entered my journey, right?
Mm-hmm.
I also recognize that all methods have a place. And I think we have to ascertain what is the right placement. So then if we're talking about back to this question around the body, right? I mean, depression, clinical depression can be a manifestation of trauma. Overeating, and many trauma survivors are overweight, particularly individuals who've been sexually assaulted, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost the body's way of protecting itself, right? If I can look, even it's not a conscious thing, because the brain does all kind of things to help us to survive, which is why sometimes when we think about remembering a story, and we remember a story based on beginning, middle, end, well, trauma survivors don't remember in linear ways, because what happens to the left side of the brain, which is that the functioning that we need to be able to create a connection, right, from A
Mm-hmm.
to C to D, um, it actually mutes that part of the brain, and the right side of the brain becomes ignited. And so this is why oftentimes when you're talking to trauma survivors, they may know, sometimes they have no recollection, because it's the brain's way of keeping you intact, right? Because at the end of the day, the
Yeah.
body is just trying to help us to survive. So we have a normal stress response, right? And so it might have been stressful thinking about preparing for this interview, right? Let's just say, for example, that's a
Mm-hmm.
normal stress response. And eventually that's going to be softened, right? You're going to get in your breath, you'll get in the rhythm of it. You'll start to feel good about it. So that worry that you had is now it's dissipated. Whereas if you have unhealed trauma, it's almost like you're on constant alert, right? Like that normal stress response can't go anywhere, and it's literally gets stored in the body. So there's certain triggers that will happen, for example, where you might smell something, or you hear a song, or you see a certain word, or someone says something like someone else, all kinds of things, and your body can go right back to that moment in time that the traumatic experience happened, even though you're here right now in this moment.
Yeah.
Your
That's
body doesn't
crazy.
know the difference, right?
Yeah.
So when you think about that, and our bodies are supposed to be in a homeostasis point of, I will say a homeostasis point. That's how the body is optimally functioning. Well, if any part of the body is on override, right, then it's going to inevitably affect other organ systems. So even down to, for again, sexual assault, the maturation process can become accelerated, right? They find that young girls that have been sexually assaulted, they mature at a rate a couple years faster than
Mm.
who have not. It's amazing because the body doesn't know anything different, right? You have the
Yeah.
physiological aspect of what, sex should be pleasurable, and your body's going to respond regardless of if you're assaulted or not. Do you see what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
that when you think about the layered impacts that one can have, and that's really just scratching the surface. That's why I started with every single major organ system in the body can be affected by trauma. And this is why you have pathology that oftentimes exists, right? People are afraid to go outside. They're afraid, like these are not rooted, it's not rational necessarily, but rational in that it's being driven from this traumatic experience, and that if gone unaddressed, then we can't heal something that we're not willing to touch. And
Right.
we have lots of reasons why we don't want to touch it, right? But one of the things that I say to people is that, it really comes down to how you want to live your life. And if and if trauma's in the driver's seat because your nervous system hasn't rested enough, right? The nervous system rests and you can function at a better rate when healing starts, right?
Yeah.
But depending on what your experiences are, those triggers may never leave, but you just have enough in your toolbox and you've moved far along enough on the healing continuum that you can interrupt that trigger from disrupting your life in totality, right? And that's how
Mhm.
many of us are living. We're living in a state of immense fear, and in other ways that it's affected our body because our bodies have been assaulted, right? And because our bodies, our minds, and it's not really one, it's not, the body and the mind aren't really separate. It's all one, right? If the mind is assaulted, the body is too. And so I was just talking to someone. I'm recording a trauma and healing podcast series right now, and
Mhm.
I did an interview with someone who said, when we're cut, the communication to the brain is the same physically if we're cut. It's the same communication that happens when we're emotionally harmed by someone,
Mm.
right? And yet, if we're
Yeah.
physically cut, what do? We go out of our way to get healing, right? Most of us are going to go and try to address it. Whereas
Yeah.
with emotional healing, many of us, we don't want to look at it. We don't want to touch it. We want to tuck it away. We want to say it's in the past. We want to say it's not a big deal. We want to say there's many people that have had these kinds of experiences. There's many people in the world that have had it worse than me, right? And I think it just all comes down to how we want to live our lives. And if we want to live in a state of joy and peace and financial prosperity and living as balanced as we can. If we've come from trauma and we haven't healed, then we can all be rest assured that there are things disrupting our ability to do that.
Yeah. What would you say the importance is for somebody to um, get help and not try to do it by themselves?
Yeah, so I love this question because it is about getting the help that you need until you can help yourself, right? And
Hmm.
so what I would say is that if people are listening and any of this is resonating with them, then that's your call to action, right? If you are if you've known for a long time, if you have felt things are off, if you aren't getting satisfaction out of life as much as you know that you could be, if you question your worthiness, if you have a hard time articulating your voice, I mean, I think it's really important for us to ascertain the question that you asked me in the beginning: who am I, and how did I come to be?
Hmm.
And I think that for all of us, asking ourselves that question versus this idea that many of us have, this is just the way that I am. And yes, and we don't have
Yeah.
to say anyway, right? Like change is possible for all of us at any time. And it doesn't matter how long we've been stuck in something. The minute that we choose that we no longer want to be stuck in it is the minute that God, universe, source, creator will conspire to support us in getting there. So I would say that if the if the comfort of staying the same is no longer as pertinent as the discomfort of remaining the same, right? Because we don't change for reason. We get benefits from not changing, right?
Yeah.
There's many of us, in fact, get addicted to drama and we get addicted to the pain, essentially, right? Because that's all we know. And I believe that just like for me and so many others, there's just a more optimal pathway if we choose. And whether we don't, and even if we don't choose, that's okay, right? It's our choice and our choice alone. But if we
Yeah.
are making the choice, then there's a plethora of support that's out there. And I would just say that if someone is looking to work with their trauma directly and they're entering in from that space. There's lots of ways that we can do that, right? But if you're talking about a therapist, you want someone who's trauma informed, who's community responsive. People make the assumption that just because we're therapists that we have had the training, but the reality is that that specialized trauma training is not a part of even getting your graduate degree, right, as a
Mm,
therapist. And it took a lot of specialized training for me. I'm trauma sensitive yoga certified. I've read a lot of books on it. I've gone to all kind of trainings on it, and I'm still learning, right? And of
yeah.
course, my own lived experience as well, which is the case for so many of us. Same thing with a coach. You have coaches that are trauma informed, that are community responsive. Some coaches out there that are trained in internal family systems. EMDR is also an effective treatment. Yoga in itself can be very healing for the body and help you to integrate back in the body. Spending time in nature, if we're talking about self practices, concerted time in nature, particularly when we're completely unplugged, it just helps the body to heal itself. And then if we're practicing mindful kinds of practices like being unplugged, like allowing nature to pull us in wherever we're being gravitated towards. These are all healing practices, right? Even just having this conversation with you right now about the things that we're talking about, the healing is ensuing right now as we speak.
Mm, that's beautiful. I love that. You were talking about discomfort, and what I've seen in clients sometimes is that they start their healing journey and they get really uncomfortable because change is uncomfortable. And they make it a sign that they're going in the wrong direction and then they quit. Um, how would you address that situation in a client?
Yeah, to normalize it.
Mm.
I There is darkness before the light.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to just acknowledge that. I tell clients often, you have to be ready. I mean, readiness is such a tricky thing, right? Because I think we have to be ready enough. We have to be ready enough to say, I'm willing to walk through this door knowing this is going to bring a lot of stuff up for me. And if I can sit with it long enough, if I cannot run from it, if I can actively get the support that I need and be present, just keep showing up. If I just keep showing up and if I keep doing the work, right? And I can say that because me too, right? I more recently I was in the process of submitting the book for a book award, and I said, I really want to go back through the book and do another round of edits. I said during my book launch, I said, it was one of the gifts that came out of this book was the gift of imperfection, right? And
Mm-hmm.
knowing that I needed to get the book out to the world. And when I went back and I looked at it, I said, oh, there's quite a few things that I would change about this, right? The essence of it is the same. And I said, of course, I wanted to write the best book possible, but it was more important for me to get the book out there and to know that this is the best I can get it for right now. So fast forward, release the book in December. In March, I'm getting ready to submit for this book award. And I go through and I edit the entire manuscript again. And it was gut wrenching at times. And there were tears. And there was times when I literally felt ill because there's a re-traumatization
Yeah.
that I'm experiencing, right? Now, this is my story. I know this story like the back of my hand. I wrote the book. I lived it. And yet, every time I read about it, or if I talk about it, those emotions come to the surface. Now, what I know to be true is that this too shall pass. And the reason why we're afraid to enter into a realm where we know it's getting ready to shake us to our core is because we don't know anything about that. We can't predict what's going to happen in that space. So
Yeah.
we think that we're going to totally, it's going to obliterate us. We're going to lose control and we're not going to be able to regain it. But that's a fallacy, right? Yes, you will experience what you will experience, but it will be worth it because when you do the work and you find yourself on the other side, and you saw that I use quotations because um and maybe I'll say when you see yourself so far removed from where you are right now, right? You've healed, that you've moved so far along your pathway that yes, it's still you, but it's a more optimal version of you now. It's
Yeah.
a higher version of you now, right? And that higher version allows unspeakable joy. It allows unspeakable ease. It allows financial prosperity. It allows aligned, beautiful relationships. It allows us the ability to set boundaries that are right sized, to ask for what we're worth, to know that we can take up space in the world, to know that we're worthy of living a great life. It doesn't matter that we've never seen anyone do it in our lives, right? We have so much power, and we will not discover that fully unless we walk the pathway of healing. And there's no fast track. Now, the beautiful thing is that research shows that if you're talking about EMDR, for example, EMDR has been known to be effective in as little as 2 treatments without having any symptomology show back up for someone that falls
Mm.
within that PTSD category. And not just instantly, we're talking 3 months, 6 months, 1 year post treatment. Now, I also don't want to say that we are individuals. The way that we consume something is not going to be the same. What
Yeah.
works might not work for you. But I think the key is to know that there are tons of ways that we can help to support the body in healing itself. And there are tons of ways that we can lean on the support of other people and enter in whenever we need to. Because, I've worked with several coaches. I'm a coach myself. I've hired coaches, right? I've had therapy in the past. I'm a Reiki master and teacher. I do Reiki on myself every morning these days before I even get out of bed. I spend
Mm.
time in nature. I have tons of practices in my toolbox, and sometimes I have to increase my practices depending on what I've got going on in my life. So I think about when I released this book, I worked with a coach for several months leading up to the execution of getting the book into the world, because I knew it was important for me to have someone that would just have space for me emotionally. B, that I had someone to be accountable to based on my timeline for when I wanted to get the book out into the world. So we're not working together right now, but there's probably a time that we're going to work together again, right? Depending
Yeah.
on shows up in my life. So the key is to be willing to do something, be willing to try on different things, and knowing that, this is the last thing I'll say for now, is that the practitioner, if you're talking about getting help from someone, the practitioner is really critically important, because when we have psychological safety in relationships, right, people harm us, but people also heal us. And all practitioners are not a good fit, right?
Yeah.
All of them don't have the personality. All of them don't have the cultural acumen, right, to be able to meet you where you are.
Mm.
So just, if you decide that therapy or a coach or any kind of holistic practitioner is someone you want to work with, know that you're not set. It's not set in stone, right? If you find someone and it's not a good fit, find somebody else, because there's somebody out there who's going to be an optimal fit should you decide that that's the route that you want to take.
Yeah. Kind of like dating to see which therapist fits best, or coach or whatever. It's
Yes,
like our
exactly.
blind date right now.
Exactly. You nailed
Yeah. Yeah.
it.
I did want to touch on I used to think that healing and personal development, there was like you're personally developing and then there's a destination and then you're healed.
Mm,
And that's just not the case. The whole thing is an adventure. And when we're striving to be the best possible version of ourselves every day, no matter what that looks like in that day, then you are the best version of yourself in that moment. And so I just think it's beautiful and we just continue, I call it an adventure,
yeah.
the self-healing and growing and just putting something into yourself every day.
Yeah. Yeah. I love how you described it because what you're framing is the power of practice. And that when we, every day, if we're doing something to invest in ourselves, right, through our spiritual practices or reading a book or having deep conversations, whatever our consumption is, hopefully that consumption is the kind of consumption that's going to nourish us,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to expand our thinking, that's going to raise our consciousness. Because what you just said is so critical. We are meant to evolve. We are meant to continue to peel back the layers so that we can discover the fullness of who we are, so that we can self actualize, which many people on this planet don't get a chance to do because
Mm-hmm.
we believe that this is it.
Yeah.
Um, and I am it, and there's no more for me to acquire. And the reality is that there's always more. There's always more to learn. There's always more to be. There's always more to discover about our purpose. There's always
Mm-hmm.
more relationships that can be built. There's always more money that can be made. There's always more.
Yeah.
Uh, and we get to discover all of the more if we are willing to do the daily dosage necessary for the rising. And so taking on this mindset of student and teacher always is one of the antidotes by which that we can get there.
Yep. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is unveiling your beast.
Yes, I love it.
Uh, so I do have one more question for you, and I ask everyone at the end of every episode, and that is if you had one piece of advice that you could give to the world, what would it be?
To take your healing as seriously as you take anything in your life. If you know that there are things from your past that you haven't dealt with, this is your opportunity to do something about it. You don't have to sit in it anymore.
Boom.
Boom, there
Ladies
it
and oh, go ahead.
is.
Sorry.
Boom, there it is.
There it is.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, Demarra West signing off. Until next time.
Ashe, beautiful people.